Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Unlocking the Potential of VoIP, Improve Communication and Collaboration Across Your Business. I am Matthew Formisano, Product Marketing Specialist at LBMC Technology Solutions, and I'll be your host and moderator today. Thank you all for joining. Just a few housekeeping items to go over before we get started. All lines have been muted to eliminate any background noise. If you experience any technical difficulties, please let us know by using the chat panel. We will be taking questions throughout today's webinar and we'll answer as many as time allows, so feel free to submit your questions at any time. You can do this in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We encourage you to use the chat and Q&A features as there are many attendees registered for today and you have a captive audience of users from around the country in a variety of industries. So you never know, you may be facing a challenge that someone else on here has already been through or solved. After today's event, you'll be receiving an email with the slides from today's presentation, recording, and a survey link. Please submit the survey as your survey will enter you into a raffle drawing for a $50 Visa gift card. As we have some new faces here today, I wanted to take a few minutes and tell you about us at LBMC Technology Solutions. We like to say that we are your team for everything tech, from help desk and IT support to fully outsourced managed IT solutions. We are the team you can call to tackle any technology project, from something small like an Office 365 licensing to large-scale infrastructure projects like moving to the cloud. LBMC Technology Solutions is here to help. If you think of a need, drop it in the Q&A, the chat, or send us an email at info@lbmctech.com. And now, without further ado, please let me welcome our presenter for today's webinar, Joe Cron. Joe is a virtual Chief Information Officer with LBMC Technology Solutions. From a Senior Vice President of IT and Facilities to Chief Technology Officer, Joe brings over 30 years of experience in technology, systems architecture, implementation, and project management, serving healthcare, manufacturing, printing, merchandising, and education. A passionate problem solver, Joe strives to comprehend the needs of the business as it relates to technology. Welcome, Joe, and thank you for presenting today.
Hey, Matthew, thanks very much for the introduction and good afternoon to everyone. Hope you're enjoying this, at least in Nashville, this wonderful spring afternoon that we've got. So again, really appreciate everyone's attendance. As Matthew mentioned a moment ago, there will be plenty of opportunity throughout the presentation for any questions. Again, as he mentioned, please use the chat feature for that. And also, there'll be a few questions that we'll ask you throughout the presentation. And again, hope you'll take the opportunity to respond to those questions. Without further ado, let me go ahead and let's get started this afternoon with our presentation. This is a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. I've actually been involved with supporting telephony, unified communications, et cetera, whatever label or name you want to put on it for many, many, many years. And I think one of the things that typically has been an overriding theme for me has always been finding a solution that allows me to not only obviously address the business objectives and the requirements for my clients, but also finding a solution that is easy to maintain. There's one thing that I think all of us have probably experienced, and that is solutions that require an enormous amount of training, ongoing training. Quite frankly, they just have a lot of overhead, and consequently, oftentimes when that happens, we get very discouraged in using those platforms, those solutions. And so that's always been sort of the overriding theme for me, is to find something that certainly addresses the need, but also does it in a way that can be easily maintained, and also on top of that, provide end users their own management capabilities as far as their extensions concerned, et cetera. We're going to go over quite a bit of material today. We're going to start by reviewing some objectives that we're going to attempt to deliver today. The first of which is talking about how businesses, hopefully your business potentially, are leveraging voice over IP and unified communications to simplify your needs as a business. One of the things that we find very, very frequently, and it kind of goes back to the statement I made a minute ago about training, is that oftentimes we find organizations have it's kind of one extreme to the other. Either scenarios where they have very, very few people that are experts or have, for that matter, any experience in supporting their existing phone solution. The other extreme is that their solution is so complicated that it requires them to have both in-house experience and sometimes multiple FTEs that are necessary to support their environment. And so again, we want to speak to that today. We know that a lot of folks have existing solutions in place. Some of those solutions, you might put a label on them and say that they're legacy solutions. And then in some scenarios, many of you may have already adopted a relatively new piece of technology, but is it really, again, addressing what your business objectives and business needs really are? And this is all around examining what you have. Sometimes what you need and what you have may be sitting right in front of you, and you may just not realize it. So again, we're going to speak to that as well. How do you leverage, in fact, even the platform we're using for this webinar right now, platforms like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and other collaboration platforms. Oftentimes we find that organizations, especially in sort of really the advent of going through COVID over the last few years, have made some decisions organizationally about potential or particular collaboration solutions that they're using. And again, the focus often is, if you've already got one of those solutions in place, you're comfortable with it, there may be some ways to, again, leverage that solution and add some additional feature sets to that as well. We're going to also speak to 3 different solutions that LBMC supports on a regular basis, and where those particular solutions tend to fit. One thing that we really try to avoid as an organization is kind of an all things to all people, one size fits all approach. Very simply, that really doesn't exist. Each organization, each client that we service has very, very unique challenges and unique requirements. And consequently, part of our role is working with you to try to find what is that best solution. And sometimes, again, there's not one single solution. Sometimes it's multiple solutions, and we'll speak to that as well. I want to start with this slide. It's a slide I've used in a variety of different presentations over the years. One of the things that information technology is really, really good at is using a whole bunch of acronyms. And we have a tendency, I think, sometimes to just sort of assume that everyone sort of knows what all these things are. Unified communication has been one of those areas that has really grown in its overall broad suite of services over the last several years. Again, I kind of go back to before COVID and after COVID. Many of these services existed, but quite frankly, as we all went into sort of an unprecedented set of circumstances, many of us working remote, working from home, and in fact, today, as we know, a lot of organizations are still doing that. The reliance upon these particular areas were quite frankly a requirement. So I want to very briefly touch on each of these. I'm going to call them kind of swim lanes for a moment. Unified communications, and you'll see a lot of this referred to as a service. Again, oftentimes as people are navigating from maybe a legacy solution that they have today to a new solution platform, I would say more than not, people are more interested in the opportunity to move to something that is not being managed within their facility. They like the idea of moving this into the cloud. And so the idea of unified communications as a service is really, what can I do to basically take all of these different areas and roll them up into a cloud-based solution service? Call center as a service. Many of our clients, we find, have a necessity for some, maybe not excessive, but some call center capability. And you might ask, well, what's a call center? Well, sometimes I think we get caught up in kind of looking at call center in such a way. But in this particular situation, what we're really referring to may be as simple as I need to actually ring multiple people's phones at the same time. There's actually features and functionality inside of all of the solutions we're going to talk about today that are with leverage, if you will, call center as a service functionality to deliver those calls. Communications platforms as a service. Again, this kind of is another building block. Maybe in the past, and maybe even today, you may have a piece of communications hardware in your data center or in your data closet that actually, in a sense, is the kind of the root hardware that runs your communications platform. Now the idea is, let's take what used to be a piece of hardware in your data closet, let's move that to the cloud. Trunking as a service. This is one I want to stop and mention a little bit more in more detail on for just a moment, and that is many of us are very used to the concept and the idea of paying the phone company for certain things. And that may just be something as simple as a single line, if you kind of recall back when we actually had single lines in our homes. And then, kind of going forward, we think of potentially paying the phone company for multiple lines, or something that I know we tend to deal with quite a bit today is still the advent of fax. And we're going to talk about faxing as a service here in just a moment as well. The idea of trunking as a service is moving away from the traditional, moving away from the traditional AT&T, Windstream, Lumen, go down the list of carriers that traditionally will deliver some form of an actual communication service in your office. Now we can actually deliver that same dial tone service, and we can do that entirely via the internet. And so that's the concept of trunking as a service. Device as a service, again, you may still need desk phones. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. In the past, that would typically involve you going and purchasing those pieces of equipment. Most of the solutions that we both support today and others offer an opportunity for those devices, desk phones, et cetera, that hardware, to also be delivered as an actual service. In other words, more or less a rental program for those particular pieces of equipment. And then meetings as a service. Quite frankly, what we're doing right now, the actual ability to use these collaboration platforms, Zoom, Teams, GoToMeeting, Google Meet, so on and so forth. Again, oftentimes potentially purchased as an a la carte piece of software or a service, but it oftentimes rolled up into really this overriding communications or unified communications as a service bundle. So we're going to ask a real quick question here. In your organization today, do you use any of these cloud-based collaboration tools like Microsoft Teams, like Zoom, or are you just using things like a standard phone on a desk phone, email, those types of communication tools, or maybe, a little bit of both? If you can give us an answer in the poll that we've got up there right now, that would be appreciated. Give everyone a moment to respond. And I must apologize. I'm dealing with the good old seasonal allergies right now, so you may see me sip a little coffee. All right, we'll go ahead and move forward, but we'll come back and speak to the poll answers here in just a moment. Appreciate that. Thank you to all of you that responded. It looks like that the majority of our participants today are using some form of full solution, like a Teams, like a WebEx, Zoom, so on and so forth. So not a surprise. We tend to see quite a bit of that. That's been certainly the trend over the last several years. So again, really appreciate your feedback. So I always start by asking and sort of pointing out the obvious. Now, the order these are in may not necessarily be the order that you communicate. But I will tell you that statistically and otherwise, this is a very high tendency when it comes to how we tend to talk to each other on a day-to-day basis. I was actually speaking with a coworker yesterday, and we were talking about how critical it is for us to be able to communicate organization to organization, or even within our own organization on a day-to-day basis. And the conversation was really more around business continuity and disaster recovery. And, part of that conversation, and we always kind of chuckle, but it's true. When email doesn't work, when the phone doesn't work, oftentimes organizations feel like they can't work because we rely so much on electronic communication and voice communication. And when we think about how we talk to each other, how we communicate each day, often we kind of start that with chat or text or SMS. I'm sure many of you on the call today are parents, and I will say I have 2 adult children, and my wife and I both joke that it seems like during the business day is when they have the highest tendency to all of a sudden just want to text us things. I have no earthly idea why, but it seems like it just happens that way. We all have this tendency to use that as sort of a first outreach tool. If I need to get someone on the phone or get someone's attention quickly, oftentimes I'll use chat. Now, if chat doesn't do the trick, or if I need to extend that conversation, then oftentimes I'm adding a phone call to that mix. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna contact that person. I'm gonna actually have that conversation with them on the phone. If there's others that need to be involved with that conversation, then we take it one step further and we go to conference several parties together and we do a conference call. I kind of look at video conferencing, and maybe you may agree or not disagree with this, but prior to a few years ago, there's a lot of people that would not be comfortable, some still aren't, with video conferencing. I don't want to see myself and really don't want anyone else to see me. But now it's become a requirement. Not only is that become the accepted status, but we expect to see that party. We expect to see them on screen. They expect to see us. And so video conferencing has become a requirement in how we work every day, how we communicate. And then consequently, another piece of this becomes screen sharing. I need to share a piece of information and electronic information with another party. And again, all of these are building blocks, but it's exactly how we communicate. So if we think about what these building blocks represent and how we truly do communicate with each other, when we go to look for a solution, if all of those things are not included, if there's not capabilities for each of those, is it really a solution that's going to, again, support our business objectives on a daily basis? So we look at what, again, makes up this unified communications platform. Chat, voice, conferencing, video, content sharing, or screen sharing. All of these typically are those building blocks that most organizations are now saying are not optional, but are complete requirements. And that's why we absolutely see these collaboration platforms like Teams, like Zoom, like Google Meet, et cetera, being so popular. Because I want to be able to go as much as possible to one solution and to be able to complete all of these different communications aspects in one solution with one tool, if at all possible. So we talk about factors to consider when we're evaluating a unified communications solution, and there are many. We're going to speak to several of these a little bit more in detail than others, but we'll go through this list. Feature cost. So one of the things that is really an example of a legacy solution, and I'm not specifically going to talk about one particular manufacturer over the other, but just suffice it to say that if you look back 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, et cetera, at most of the manufacturers of communications hardware, in order to unlock certain features, there was a cost. there was a base set of features that we all got. Those base set of features probably allowed us to make a phone call, have a voicemail box, those things. But for us to add on any other piece of feature set, we had to unlock that, and to unlock it, there was a cost involved. There's obviously always upfront cost. If I am acquiring pieces of hardware, whether that be a server that maybe runs my voice solution or unified communication solution, telephones that go on desk, conference room phones, et cetera, professional services, obviously, to deploy those particular solutions, there's always, of course, upfront costs that have to be evaluated. Total cost of ownership, absolutely. So a lot of people will ask this question because they're used to purchasing, for an example, computers, network equipment, other pieces of IT or technology hardware. And oftentimes when we are looking at total cost of ownership, we sort of arrive at a 5-year number. Some pieces of hardware we certainly can get a lot longer than 5 years out of, but again, there's always that estimation of total cost of ownership. If I'm looking at it over 5 years, what's it going to cost me? If I want to extend that to 7, what's it going to cost me, et cetera? Connectivity, what do I need to make this work? Well, in the past, it might be as simple as a couple of standalone phone lines. We call them analog phones lines or POTS lines. It might be a digital circuit called a PRI. Today, however, most of the time, we're talking about having a solid internet connection into our business. Why do we care so much about connectivity? Well, if I'm delivering that solution over the internet, the quality and how solid of an internet service that I have is going to, quite frankly, dictate the next item on this list, and that's call quality. There's nothing worse than I've got a solution and people are complaining about call quality. And yet, that happens quite frequently, especially when we're talking about the utilization of, again, services, cloud-based services that are delivered over the internet. And we'll speak to this in a few moments, but again, many of us are used to using mobile solutions as well. Mobile solution might be on our smartphone, it might be on a tablet, it might be on a laptop. Please keep in mind that, again, substandard connectivity is going to absolutely impact call quality. Call volume, how many calls am I ingesting or am I making on a daily basis from my organization? You know, do I have some small call center requirements? And if I do, how is that call volume being impacted? And that's really, we're going to look at that and typically look at that from two perspectives. One, what's the capacity that we need to support your organization? But also, do I have some special, for example, seasonal needs where my call volume may ebb and flow during certain seasonal events? Conferencing, again, am I paying for a third-party solution that is providing conferencing today? Is it something that I could take advantage of an existing platform or a platform that I'm considering and eliminate that third-party solution? Revertibility is an interesting one, but it's something that we always look at. If you have an existing solution today and you're looking at a new solution, do I have a good project plan in place where if for some reason something does not go well, that I can revert back to the solution that I have in place? It's very, very, very important, especially if your business is dependent upon voice communications in particular. And sometimes we see when we are migrating from one platform to the other, sometimes there's real easy revertibility, sometimes there's not. Compliance, something that we see probably more so now than ever, and that is being able to not only ensure that the traffic, the voice traffic, unified communications traffic is compliant, but also be able to prove it. And that comes from a couple of different angles, working with the vendor to solidify that information, but also in some cases being able to even take it one step further and working, for example, with a cybersecurity insurance provider. I mentioned cloud earlier. Do I want to place or support a solution in my own data center or data closet, or do I want to completely eliminate that and go cloud completely? And there's a place for both of those solutions. One that is probably as critical to me as anything. Once it's installed, and I know this may be some surprise to some of you, that's somewhat of a joke, but is it supportable? Quite frankly, when I need support, can I get it? How fast can I get support? Very, very critical element. And one that kind of goes hand in hand with customer support, and that's vendor commitment. And the reason that we bring up vendor commitment is that oftentimes we find that there are manufacturers and vendors out there that even though they actually have a solution does not necessarily mean that that is something that they're in for the long haul. Some of the vendors that have been in the communication space for a long time, it would surprise you how many of them actually do not put their communications platform front and center in their organization. It's very simply not a priority. And solvency, again, goes with that as well. Is that vendor solvent? Is that vendor going to be here in 5 years, in 7 years, in 10 years? And so we talk about these platforms. We talk about, again, finding single source solutions. And sometimes that question is the first that gets asked. Is there a vendor I can go to and purchase everything? The old adage of one throat to choke, right? One finger to point. Yes, there are. In the past, we would have, and this really dates me, but back in the day, we had Nortel, we had Avaya, we had NEC, we had Panasonic, we had, just go down the list. A lot of those organizations are no longer in this business anymore. But the ones that still are, including many of the cloud-based solutions that are out there, one of the key components is that single source platform, being able to go to one source. The exception of maybe the exception to that single source might be hardware. Do they actually manufacture their own, for example, telephones? Do they manufacture, I'll call them ancillary devices that I might use, paging, things of that sort? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But the key is compatibility. The key is building blocks. And again, that compatibility issue is one that has is probably always a concern, not as much maybe as it used to be. Again, most of these platforms do play very well together. We spoke to this a moment ago. Is it something that you want to host in your office? An office might be data closet for larger organizations, your data center, et cetera. Do you need this hosted in a private cloud? I'm going to come back to private cloud in just a moment and speak to that. Or vendor cloud. Most of these vendors, they provide their own hosted solution. So where does private cloud fit into this? There are times when organizations will need a solution that actually, in most cases, would be installed and supported in their own office space or in their data center or data closet. But because they don't want to worry about that hardware being in their location, we can actually place that into a private cloud. So they get the same capabilities, they're just not hosting that in their own facility. And that's a very popular option. We actually do that quite frequently. This is probably the #1 area that has changed dramatically and quite frankly, in a good positive way for all of us. And that's this all features for one price concept. Again, kind of moving away from this nickel and diming approach. I'm going to buy a seat of this particular product, a license of this product, and I'm going to get all the features that come with it. It's a very attractive concept. I think the one thing that I've enjoyed about being able to deliver this message over the years with solutions that we provide is that now, as an executive or a decision maker in your organization, you don't have to use economics to necessarily make a decision about what features and functionality a user in your organization is actually able to use. You know, oftentimes you end up getting this proposal and you look at it and you're like, well, I guess I'm going to have to make a decision on who gets what. And in this particular approach, that's no longer a requirement. And we mentioned this a moment ago as we were going through the different acronyms, the different swim lanes, if you will, but dial tone, probably more than ever, is an area that we see the most opportunity for organizations. Even if you have an existing solution that you're happy with, in most cases, this would be a solution where you have hardware being hosted in your office or data center, but you're paying AT&T, Lumen, Windstream, legacy carriers for your dial tone. Oftentimes, first and foremost, every one of these carriers are getting out of the copper business. What do I mean by that? If you have a smaller solution where there are POTS lines, analog lines being delivered to you, you probably have already been communicated with by one of these carriers to say, we're not supporting this stuff anymore. For an example, if you have fax lines, if you have lines that are supporting, for an example, life safety, elevators, things of that sort, you're going to have to figure out a way to replace those. For those of you that might have digital services, often called a PRI, PRIs are still out there, they're still being sold, but oftentimes, again, the legacy vendors are trying to get out of that business. Where do they want you to move to? Well, they want you to move to something called SIP. And SIP is, quite frankly, nothing more than dial tone delivered over the internet. And so there are many SIP carriers out there, several SIP providers that we align with. And very simply, it gives you the ability to migrate or move your legacy carrier or dial tone provider to these SIP options. One of the biggest advantages to doing that is when you actually do make that move, you're automatically starting to build some business continuity and disaster recovery planning into your organization, because I'm no longer reliant on that piece of wiring, if you will, that's being delivered directly into my office, data center, data room, so on and so forth. So a very popular option. I do want to be careful by saying this. Is it always cost effective or more cost effective than those legacy carriers? And I would say the answer to that is not necessarily. Sometimes the pricing is very similar to what you're already paying. Sometimes it is cheaper, but it's that flexibility factor. That's what you're really looking for. And the very simple fact that, again, many of these carriers are getting out of that space. So again, we talk about features. Mobility. There is not a day that goes by, I'm going to speak for myself, but I have a feeling I'm also speaking to each of you, where my smartphone is the key instrument that I use for communications. My wife would say I'm too attached to it, that many of you may be too. But the fact is that in the past, you know, most of us, many of us, sat at our desk in our office space, and we had a traditional desk phone sitting on my desk. If you could see my office right now, you would see a lot of desk phones. Because of what we support, I have a little bit of everything in here. But if I didn't have that requirement, I actually wouldn't have a desk phone at all, because I'm very used to using my mobile device. I'm very comfortable with it. It's what I use every day. So why add another component, right? So mobility, probably the #1 request and demand that we see from our clients. Presence. Presence is something that we all use every day. You may not realize you use it, but you do. If you're a Teams user and you have a calendar entry, you're going to be attending a meeting. If you glance up in Teams, most of the time Teams will do this for you. It changes your presence, your status from available, usually a little green icon, to red. It's automatic. Certain solutions do it automatically. Some give you the option to also set that independent. And there's a place for both of those. But again, being able to have that solution look at what I'm doing at any one given time and again, present my particular presence or status to other coworkers. Unified messaging goes back to this whole concept of how we do communicate. Usually, again, chat, SMS, the chat may be entirely internal, or it may be that I'm communicating with people outside the organization. But again, I'm using one of several maybe potential unified messaging options or tools. So I just had a very recent situation with an existing client of ours. And I'm going to use this as an example in a couple of places here in the presentation, because sometimes you start down a path with a particular solution only to find out that maybe it checks off some of the boxes, but it doesn't check off all the boxes. Or even more so, sometimes you don't even realize that you have that requirement till you get well into a deployment. And reporting and call logging is one of those areas that we tend to run into this pretty frequently. In an existing legacy solution, there are scenarios often where a client will tell us, and we'll ask during our discovery period when we work on project deployments. So do you do reporting, call reporting in your organization? Do you need to log calls? Do you need to be able to understand how often, a particular phone extension or a phone line or maybe a published number, how many times a day that gets rung, et cetera? And we find that the typical answer is very little, or I didn't even know my solution had any reporting or call logging capability. And so quite frankly, probably one of the number one first discussion items that we have is what are going to be those reporting requirements? And let's talk about that. Some solutions are far more robust than others. Collaboration, again, how often am I really just talking to another party, just one other party? Nowadays it's often that we are having a collaborative discussion amongst many of us. So again, do I have a tool in my arsenal, in my solution, that's going to let me do that collaboration? Do I have the need to record calls or monitor calls? So when I'm actually, again, working with third parties, et cetera, do I have the need to record a call? Do I need to record a call all the time? Do I need ad hoc recording? Do I need to give my end users the option to record a call on the fly? And for those of you that may have call center requirements, do I have the ability to monitor calls for my call center agents, those that are taking calls on behalf of my organization? And what features and capabilities are available to me? I mentioned call queues earlier. Different phone solutions, different unified communication solutions. Some refer to call queues as different things, but very simply, a call queue is just this. It's the ability to deliver a phone call to typically multiple parties, and based on certain criteria, be able to determine how long I want specific phones to ring before other actions take place. Maybe I ring a certain group of people, and then another group of people phones start to ring. Eventually, does that phone call end up in voicemail, so on and so forth? And we have an extreme amount of flexibility in how we deliver those types of solutions. Several of you may use CRM CRM platforms, Salesforce, Sugar CRM, Dynamic CRM, et cetera. And do I have a requirement to integrate my unified communication solution with those CRM platforms? An example of that might be, again, someone in the organization receives a call comes in based on caller ID. It looks at my CRM application, cross-references that to an entry in CRM, and does a screen pop. So again, very common use case for that. Conferencing, I mentioned this one earlier. Am I paying a third party already for third-party audio conferencing? Can I do away with that, save myself some money, and push that into my unified communications solution? And this is a long word to say IVR. A lot of people know it as automated attendant. We find that organizations very often are operate one of two ways. I want every call that comes into my organization to be answered by a live person, or none of my calls, when they're received, are answered by a live person. They're answered by an automated attendant with a variety of options for my caller, and that those options direct those callers to the appropriate location. And again, does the solution actually offer that? And for any and all of these, I go back to that single source, everything for one price concept. Do I have to pay for any of these things, or do I just get them as part of my license that I've purchased? So here's the second question that we're going to ask today. Each of these is a primary challenge with teams or business collaboration? Do you deal with any drop calls, disruption of service? If you're doing things like file sharing or content sharing, do you have issues with that? Do you have scenarios where you need, and when we say rolling phones, the concept there is, again, do I need to forward phones from, say, one device to the other? Sometimes that's referred to as follow me, find me. I'm going to call my desk phone, but I really want my desk phone to now start ringing my cell phone or a soft phone on my phone, on my smartphone, etc. So we'll pause a moment, let everyone go and answer that poll question as well. And we appreciate it. Drop calls. So 50% of you said that drop calls are a challenge that you have today. And disruption of service, 25%, lack of file sharing, 25%. So thank you so much for answering that. I will tell you, drop calls, probably not much of a surprise. One of the things that I'm going to speak to in just a moment, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, around connectivity and having solid connectivity and why that's so important. Drop calls also, very similar to call quality, is also impacted by good, solid internet capability or just general communications capability. In other words, what platform is being used to deliver the dial tone to you. Where in the case of a cloud-based solution, again, most of that is being delivered via the internet. So again, how solid is that solution? And we find that very frequently, again, call quality certainly being a concern, but also, again, the other aspect of that is very typical. Drop calls may factor into that as well. So we mentioned desk phones a little bit earlier. In the last 2 years, we have had a pretty unprecedented number of projects where not a single desk phone has actually been placed on a desk in our client organizations. What does that say? Well, it says to me that, again, many of us are reliant upon mobile device products that we use, whether that's a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop, so on and so forth. But there is absolutely a place for desk phones in organizations. So, I have clients that have upwards of 800 and 900 desk phones, in a single implementation. And I have the other extreme, as I mentioned a moment ago, where there's 0. So let me just make the statement that, do I see desk phones going away? No time soon. Are there specific, I'll call them requirements for, and we'll kind of going back to some of the other slides that we've shown you when it comes to feature functionality, et cetera, where someone might say, well, I really like the idea of a soft phone, maybe on my laptop, but am I going to lose some functionality? More and more, the answer to that is no, because again, the concept is I'm trying to deliver the same feature functionality to the soft phone solutions, to that experience, than I am also with the desk phones. And in some cases, it's just pure personal preference. Some people actually enjoy the concept of having a phone that they can touch, push a button, etc. I'm going to point out a couple of things while I have the slide up here. This phone here that I'm kind of highlighting, and the little Yealink phone up in the upper right corner. By the way, the one in the upper right is a phone made by Yealink that is designed for Microsoft Teams. And they make a version that's exactly the same phone for Zoom. So there's a Zoom phone, there's a Teams version. But the point is, very small footprint. The only real rationale as far as why people select this is they have users that just feel more comfortable with that phone on their desk. Versus the Sangoma phones, and we'll talk about Sangoma as a solution here in just a moment, that these obviously a much more traditional look and feel. This phone here, more of a, again, kind of a hybrid, if you will, between the Yealink phone that you see up here. I kind of call it an iPad mini with a handset. But all of those have a place depending on the use case. That's the one thing that we always focus on is solutions oriented. We may have a situation where 95% of the population says, I really don't want a phone on my desk. But I actually, in this case, have that 5% that does want one. And in that case, we can provide what is best for them. This, of course, is probably the area that we see the most growth. And there's really two slides here. One that's going to speak to desktop soft phones, the other to mobile soft phones that are setting on, for an example, an iPhone or an Android-based phone. But the idea of a desktop soft phone is, for most of us, if we are using Microsoft Teams or if we're using Zoom, think about that Zoom or Microsoft Teams user experience, the client that you utilize on your desktop, and that might be a desktop computer, laptop, etc. And very simply, all I'm doing to implement the ability to make and receive a call is add a voice component that now lights up a dial pad. You can kind of see this on the far right-hand side of the screen. And I now can place and receive calls via that collaboration tool. I don't need a phone on my desk. I can do that entirely from that client. And again, probably one of the most popular things that we see. I'm going to give you an example of how this really changed one of our clients' organizations overnight. So we had a client, this story may resonate with several of you. In March of 2020, this client, I can tell you, on a day-to-day basis,
I'm going to get one of these carrot cakes. Wonderful.
We've got someone not on mute here. Sorry about that. We had basically a client that really never had anyone work remote. They had couple of people that would go out and see clients occasionally, but all of their organization, all of them came to the office every day. And in the span of about 48 hours, they went from having very simply everyone sitting in the office to everyone went home. And I know that was something that happened to a lot of organizations. So we got a feverish phone call from the COO of this organization. And basically he said, Joe, I got to figure out a way to get every one of my people working remote with the same functionality that they have today. And I need that like this afternoon. And inside of 24 hours, every single person in that organization was utilizing a desktop soft phone, sitting in their home office, answering calls like they did normally, including, in their case, someone that acted really as a receptionist and routed calls in the organization. And they didn't miss a beat. And that same story we saw happen time in and time out with multiple clients over several week period. Again, the ability to place the tool and have that tool work for that particular client, regardless of where that person is located. And again, the other example of that, of course, mobile soft phone clients. So the example I gave you a moment ago with that one customer, probably 90-ish percent, 95% were using the desktop soft phone, the other 5 or so percent using a mobile soft phone. You know, most of the individuals, again, were used to looking at a laptop and working in various applications, so it just made sense to give them the ability to run their soft phone directly from their laptop. But also, we have just as many customers today that are deploying unified communication solutions. Again, no desk phones ever being deployed, and every single user utilizing a mobile soft phone on their smartphone on a day-to-day basis. And then there's another wrinkle. When we all went remote, a lot of our clients and their organization, they had very little video collaboration in their conference spaces. Maybe a few large conference spaces, boardroom, et cetera, where they might have had some dedicated video conferencing solutions. But the thing is, we got sort of used to all those pieces and parts and those tools when we were working remote. And so as people come back to the office, they now expect that same set of functionality. And they don't expect it in 1 or 2 locations. They expect it in almost every single conference room, boardroom, huddle room, et cetera, that they use. And so can these different platforms also leverage, again, the ability of these types of dedicated conference room solutions and work off the same platform? And I will tell you, we do quite a bit of this as well. So we do dedicated video conferencing solutions, everything from small huddle rooms all the way up to large boardrooms and everything in between. And they all leverage the same platform. So it's all about, again, offering a single approach, a single easy way of people, again, engaging and meeting together when necessary. Question 3, what features do you want from your unified communication solution? And some examples: mobility, CRM integration, conferencing, enhanced collaboration, improved call quality, or the wonderful all of the above. I'll give you just a moment to answer. All of the above. I don't blame you at all. I think, you know, and all joking aside, I think one of the things that has transpired with most of the vendors that are in this space today, you know, we all know that competition typically works, most of the time works on our behalf. You know, as consumers, you know, when organizations compete, usually that spawns innovation. It spawns, hopefully, you know, economies of scale and certainly cost control that allow us to, again, be able to consume those features at a price point that is attractive. And so this, again, all features for one price approach is something that, again, I think most of the vendors have figured out. And let me just mention, there are still a number of organizations that have different, I'll call it, really different suites of products that are available. And that's not all bad either. There are certainly some scenarios where organizations will utilize solutions, and those solutions have some basic feature sets, and maybe that's all an organization needs. And so why pay for something that you don't need, right? I always put this slide in my presentations because, again, I mentioned this a couple of times today. Are you buying a product? Or are you buying a solution? There's not a single manufacturer out there today that makes every single product that you will need to most likely solidify your business objectives and your requirements. And so it's finding building block products. It's finding these ancillary solutions and complementary solutions that make it, are products that make it a solution. Certainly in the last 48 hours, we've all been unfortunately made aware of why life safety is so critical. And so oftentimes, if you look at sort of everything on the screen, they all speak to oftentimes life safety types of components. We support a lot of different vertical markets. We support manufacturing, we support transportation, distribution, healthcare, education, so on and so forth. And in every one of those situations, there is a place for these products, whether that be overhead paging, whether that be door phones, camera phones. All of these products typically have the ability to integrate with access control. We do quite a bit of, especially nowadays more than ever, we tie a lot of these systems together and allow our clients, for an example, to use these for, again, automated notification, especially when we think about the spring and of the year in this part of the United States. Again, shelter in place, things of that sort. All of these tools work in concert to leverage that communications platform that you've invested in. So very briefly, a little bit, because we've kind of spoken to each one of these. These are the three predominant products that LBMC sells and supports for unified communications. Are there many others out there? There are. And let me make a statement right out of the gate. As we work with our clients, there are always going to be situations where none of these three are the right fit. And if they're not, we're going to be the first to tell you they're not. And we're going to help you find what the right solution is, whether it's something that we directly or indirectly support. So I'm going to actually go in a reverse order and talk about Switchvox for a minute. So 13 years ago, we began a journey of working with a company based in Huntsville, Alabama called Digium. Digium was acquired in 2018 by a Canadian company called Sangoma. And Sangoma acquired Digium as an organization, and more importantly, this product called Switchvox. We have many thousands of seats of this product under management. And our largest clients that are running this solution today, I think we have one client that's about 1,100 seats and several clients that are in the 700 to 800 seat range, and many others that are in between all those numbers, from as few as 5 seats. Again, probably the sweet spot being somewhere in that 50 to 75 seat range. This is a solution that is probably the solution that we go to bat with more often than not. And the reason that we do that is because, quite frankly, these solutions are feature rich. They offer literally almost every bell and whistle you can think of, and we can support literally any client's requirements with these solutions. Teams, we do a whole lot of Teams phone. And so because we find so many organizations have gravitated to Teams, it is a natural next step to say, well, if I want to basically now support phone calls with my Teams client. Can I do that? Yes, you can. And so again, it's literally as simple as turning on that feature, and then at that point, again, having the proper licensing, but giving you the ability both from a desktop client or a mobile client, or again, a dedicated Teams desktop phone, make and receive those phone calls via the Teams platform. And Zoom has something very similar to that called Zoom Phone. LBMC as an organization across our corporate entity utilizes Zoom Phone as an example for our organization. So again, all three of these, a lot of experience in these spaces. One thing that I'll also speak to very briefly is that we have a lot of clients that have legacy. I'm going to be careful about using that phrase for a minute, but have existing voice over IP solutions still that are very viable, that are really attracted to this idea of this Teams user experience. And so we also have a solution from a company called Teammates that allows us to take an existing voice over IP solution, but deliver the Teams user experience to end users. So for an example, the ability to take a subset of your organization and allow those particular individuals to make and receive calls via Teams, yet your existing phone solution is actually doing all the work underneath the covers. So again, a very unique solution as well. All three of these very viable. All three of these have a place depending on the use case and depending on the organizational requirements. And Matthew mentioned this earlier when he did the introduction. LBMC has a very unique portfolio of, again, managed services offerings and in a lot of different areas. So whether it be managed IT services, whether it be our specialty in Sage Intacct, Microsoft Dynamics, IT security, we've been talking about business phone systems and unified communications, CRM, document management, so on and so forth. Again, we certainly have a broad portfolio of services that we can bring to the table and to your organization. Our last question is one that, we hope that each of you will reach out to us. And, if you'd like us to get in touch with you and have a discussion about your existing solution, we'd love to do that. That is something that it starts with really understanding what your needs are and, what you have in place today. And again, would thoroughly enjoy doing that if you'd like us to. So that's the last poll question today. So the key takeaways today, again, we just hope that you'll remember again the top considerations: cost, call quality, connectivity, call volume, customer support, compliance, conferencing abilities, and again, do you need something that's cloud, or are you interested in something that's cloud-based? And then remember also, you may be able to leverage your existing solution to do more than what it is doing today, provide you more capability. And we certainly hope that, again, we have the opportunity to speak with you about your current and future needs, and would love to speak with you about our particular solutions that we have been so successful with. And really appreciate your time today, and appreciate you're taking some time out on a beautiful afternoon to be with us.
Thank you, Joe. So we covered a lot of content today. We are at time and just trying to be mindful of everyone's time. We do not have any time for the Q&A section. However, if you do have any questions for us, please reach out to us at that email address, info@lbmctech.com, or visit our website and use our contact us form to get in touch with us. Again, we will be sending out an email in a couple of days with the links to the recording and the presentation. And as a reminder, please complete the survey for a chance to win that $50 Visa gift card, courtesy of LBMC Technology Solutions. Thanks again for attending today's webinar, and we hope you have a great day.